This is the parable of the lost son. Luke 15, 11-31. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed a fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours.'"
So we're now looking at the parable of the lost son. And I'm suggesting that the 3 stories in Luke 15, the shepherd, the lost sheep, 1 in 100, the lost coin, 1 in 10, and here the lost son, are all part of the same parable. So it's really a continuation of what we looked at earlier with the shepherd and the coin. This is a very unusual request which starts here, where the younger son said to his father, "Father, give me your share of the estate." This is in verse 12 of Luke 15. It's almost unheard of that this request would have been made. In the time of the Middle East, at the time of Israel, there's a very strong honor and shame culture. And this request would have been seen to be really shameful, because what he's really saying to his dad is, "Dad, I wish you were dead, because I want my inheritance now." Now, in fact, in the Torah, in Deuteronomy 21, we are told that the younger brother, the younger son, would often get a smaller share. And I suppose it is possible that he could have got his money without the whole estate being sold. But in this case, it really is still a shocking request. And it brings shame to himself, the younger son. It brings shame to his father. It will bring shame to his wider family, and actually it will bring shame to the wider Jewish community, because this young man ends up in a low status role in a Gentile nation, feeding the pigs. It's a bit like being dead. This is a really shameful thing which is happening. So despite this shameful, unusual request, the father gives the younger son what he's requested. And the younger son goes off to a distant country there in verse 13. Now, I think the distance is not just referring to geography. We don't know how far the country away, but it's distant in the sense of culture. This is not a Jewish community. This is a Gentile world. So he's in a very different, distant setting. And he squanders all he has received. He reaches rock bottom. And, as they say, he's feeding the pigs, a non-kosher activity. But in a sense, you may feel slightly sorry for this man as well, this young son, because he's also come across a land where there was a major famine. So while he was very foolish and impetuous, there was also other factors at work here. There was a famine, so maybe this wasn't completely self-inflicted. And in verse 17, the younger son comes to his senses, and he has a cunning plan. And you can imagine him rehearsing the speech on the long journey home, what he is going to say to his father. Yet, and this is the great moment of revelation in this parable, as he's coming back to his father, he doesn't even get onto the edge of the estate, but rather the father saw him, and probably he had been watching again and again, day after day, hoping that the son would be coming back. Maybe at times he saw a figure on the distance, and he said, "Oh, is that my son? Is he coming back?" But it turned out to be somebody else. But on this occasion, it was his son. All he's been waiting for and watching has been fulfilled. The son has come back, and he is filled with compassion, and he runs and he embraces the son. Before the son can rehearse his speech of repentance, the father embraces him. And what is happening here when the father reaches out to his son is amazing, and it goes against so much of the culture of the day. And I got a little book here which speaks about that. It's called The Cross and the Prodigal by Kenneth Bailey. If you get a chance to look at this, it really gives a valuable insight into Luke 15. I'm just going to read a little bit to you from that. This man, the father, is quite an old man. And he says this, Kenneth says this in his book: "A man of his age and position always walked in a slow and dignified fashion. He had probably not run anywhere for any purpose for at least 40 years. No villager over the age of 30 ever runs. But now the father not just runs, he races down the road. To do so, he must take the front edge of his robes in his hand like a teenager. When he does this, his undergarments would begin to show. All of this in this pride culture is incredibly shameful. The gang in the street will be distracted from tormenting the prodigal. Instead, they will run after the father, amazed at seeing this old man shaming himself so publicly. It is the very compassion mentioned in the text which leads the father to race out to his son. He knows what his son will face in the village, but he takes upon himself the shame and humiliation due to the prodigal. Let me just say that again. He takes upon himself the shame and the humiliation due to the prodigal. This humiliating spectacle in the village speaks of the meaning of the cross, where Jesus himself became sin for our sake. So Bailey is making this connection here between the embrace of the Father towards the Son to Jesus' embrace of us upon the cross. So the son is reconciled with his father, and the servants come in, and there's a community celebration. The public shame has been removed. The son has been restored. All is well. That ends well. Or is it? Because that is not where the parable ends. There's another part to this parable. The older son has seen what has been going on. The father pleads with the older son in verse 28 to come back and to embrace his brother. Maybe Jesus is telling this to challenge the Pharisees to embrace what God is doing now in his own ministry. But the older son cannot do that. He can't even call the son who's returned his brother. He simply says to his dad, "This son of yours." But he doesn't recognize him as his brother. And the older son refuses to go to the celebration. And again, this goes against the decorum and the honor of the culture. His absence from the party is indeed shameful. But the younger son is restored, and the older son is in a broken relationship now with his father. And I suppose the application for that, for us in the church, is to remember how God reconciles us to him and goes out to meet us. He watches for us. He comes back, and he comes to us as we travel back towards him. And maybe this points to the wider inclusion of the church in Acts 15 of non-Jewish people coming into the faith as well. But also I think for some of us, if you've been a Christian for many years, maybe you've been serving in the church, and then suddenly you see a new convert coming in who maybe is being particularly blessed and particularly welcomed. Sometimes we can become a bit grumpy and a bit kind of, we've been serving for many, many years, and we can become a bit like the older son in this story. So really, in a sense, two sons here are both lost at one point in the story. And it's not the prodigal son, but it's the two sons which are really the key part to this story. So there's an awesome challenge to us. In this parable, we see again God's expansive, redemptive love, which embraces the younger son, but also seeks to be reconciled to the older son. And again, we have the master teacher, Jesus, in these wonderful stories in Luke 15, in so few words, showing us so much about God's amazing love. Thanks for listening, and do dig deep into this parable, and I hope there's going to be something there for you.